Chapters 5 and 6 of A Fool There Was by Porter Emerson Brown. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. As Time Passes. Time passed on over the heads of young Jack Schuyler and young Tom Blake and the daughter of Jimmy Blair. They grew in stature and in intellect. They grew through the grades of school that lie between 9 and 15, and then they separated to go to boarding school. Jack Schuyler and Tom Blake went to one, the daughter of Jimmy Blair and Catherine Blair to another, and the baby brother that had turned out to be a sister and who had been named Eleanor stayed at home with the widow of Jimmy Blair. And the widow of Jimmy Blair was now hardly as lonely as were the parents of Jack Schuyler and Tom Blake. John Stuyvesant Schuyler had built for himself a place at Larchmont, on the Sound. Gray Rocks, he called it. It was a long, low, rambling house, built of stone and of darkened wood. It sat ensconced in a deep phalanx of great green trees at the head of a great green lawn. It was not a big house of pretension, of arrogant wealth, of many servants, of closely shaven shrubbery and woodeny landscape gardening. It was rather a house that was a home. And there is a distinction, a vast distinction, for there is many a house that is not a home, even as there is many a home that is not a house. Thomas Cathcart Blake built for himself another house next to it. That also was a rambling, home-like place, with broad halls and deep windows and wide doors. And the doors he kept open most of the time, for he liked good people, and good people liked him. His big yacht lay during most of the summer a quarter of a mile from the end of his pier. He lived on it part of the time with Mrs. Thomas Cathcart Blake and their guests. Part of the time he lived on the shore, in the house that he had built. Dr. Delancey once asked him if he ever moved the yacht from its moorings, and wanted to bet that the sail covers were stuffed with hay. Thomas Cathcart Blake grinned and said that, as for taking the yacht out to sea, he was afraid of getting it wet, and he wouldn't want to bet as to what the sail covers were stuffed with, because it might be excelsior, or cotton, or any one of a number of things. They always had much company at the Lawns, which was the name of the house, and on the Idlesse, which was the name of the yacht that seldom sailed, although Dr. Delancey begged them to rechristen it the Dock, or the Stake Boat, or something of the sort, which he thought would be much more appropriate. And among this company was a great deal the widow of Jimmy Blair and her daughter. Young Jack Schuyler and young Tom Blake got home from college that year about the middle of June. Catherine Blair was a few days later, owing to certain non-academic festivities which she didn't want to miss. You can know how popular and attractive and altogether charming she was when I tell you that she was like her mother at her age, and all New York knows how hard it was even for Jimmy Blair, and there have been very few Jimmy Blairs, you know, to make any perceptible progress amid the choking masses of his competing fellows. Jack Schuyler and Tom Blake went down to the train in a trap to meet her. They hardly recognized the girl whom they had pillow-fought and leopard-stalked in the dainty figure that descended from the dusty train. A year with a girl of 18 means vast changes, and when that year has been spent at boarding school, it means changes yet more vast, infinitely. Thus it was that Jack Schuyler and Tom Blake stood, jaws agape, eyes wide open, and stared. Frankly, unequivocally stared. Then they went to meet her, and both tried to shake hands at once. Then both tried to pick up her traveling case at once, and they bumped their heads. For the first half mile of the drive to the shore, They sat dumb, thinking with sore strainings of mind for things to say, and rejecting each because it didn't seem to be good enough. Finally, Tom Blake ventured a remark anent the weather. No harm came to him, so Jack Schuyler ventured one about the wind. He also went scatheless. At length, Tom Blake, looking at the fresh, clean beauty of the girl on the other seat, forgot himself, and voiced, in the moment of his temporary aberration, that which was in the two adolescent male minds. "Doggone, but you've grown pretty, Kate," and then blushed. She blushed too, and looked at Jack Schuyler, at which he blushed and almost caromed the trap against a telegraph pole, whereat they all laughed, and from then on they were themselves. They were met by her mother at the Lawns, and by Dr. Delancey. Dr. Delancey was not bashful. He pinched her glowing cheek and looked her over critically. "A positive symposium of pulchritude," he declared. "I wish I were 50 or 75 years younger, by Jove. If you two boys let any rank outsider take her out of the family, you'll have me to reckon with. Yes, by Jove, you will. And you'll find that while I may be a poor fencer and a worse boxer, I'm still a good spanker." End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. An Accident. Dr. Delancey, sitting under the awning of the afterdeck of the Idlesse, and gazing out upon the Sound, where Jack Schuyler, Tom Blake, and Catherine Blair were defying the laws of nature in a 30-foot knockabout, much to the unspoken anxiety of 2 fathers and the spoken fear of 3 mothers, again voiced this thought on the following evening. "The prettiest, sweetest, finest, loveliest child I ever knew, by Jove," he declared. Then, bowing, "Present company, of course, excepted. Yes, sir. If you 2 old ninnies don't force your sons to marry her, I'll take it into my own hands. Damn if I don't, by Jove." "But they can't both marry her," protested the widow of Jimmy Blair, placing her arm about the baby brother that had turned out to be a sister. The doctor waved his hand loftily. "A mere detail," he asserted. "As long as one of them marries her, that fixes it, doesn't it? And it doesn't make any difference which one. They're equally fine boys, both of them. Look at 'em. Did you ever see better shoulders, better shaped heads, better carriages? Mighty dashed handsome boys, too, they are. Get it from their mothers." He bowed elaborately to Mrs. John Stuyvesant Schuyler and to Mrs. Thomas Cathcart Blake, then added a look of contempt for and at their husbands. "Yes, sir," he went on, "they're fine boys, 2 of 'em, no denying that. And she's the right sort. No frills, or airs, or bluffs. Sensible, natural. If I'd have had a few more patients like them, I'd have starved to death long ago. Why, they didn't have even a single measle. Not one whooping cough out of the lot. Disgraceful." In the meanwhile, far out on the Sound, the little knockabout was heeling far over in the playful breath of the summer breeze. Tom Blake, bare-headed, bare-armed, was at the tiller. Jack Schuyler, also bare-headed and bare-armed, sat on the after overhang, tending the sheet, and bracing muscular legs against the swirling seas that, leaping over the low freeboard, tried to swirl him off among them. Catherine Blair, leaning lithely against the weather rail, little, white, canvas-shod feet braced, skirts whipping about her slender body, rounded arms gripping the wet edge of the cockpit rail. The gold-brown hair, in loosened strands, whipped across her tanned cheek. Her gown, open at the throat, revealed a glimpse of straight, perfectly poised throat. Her lips were parted, and her breath came fast in the excitement of it. Blake held the knockabout to its course, with the confidence of youth in his prowess, against them. The little boat leaped forward from crest to crest, stopping between to shake the water from its deck. Above was the blue sky, all about them the blue water, white-crested. The girl, bracing herself against a particularly hard pitch of the boat, balancing herself lightly as the craft recovered and again leaped forward, cried, "Isn't this fine?" Blake nodded. Schuyler, waist deep in the swooping sea, did not hear. The Long Island shore was close at hand now. Suddenly, Blake shouted, "Hard a lee!" and jammed the tiller over. Schuyler, on the after overhang, scrambled fast to take in the slack of the sheet. Catherine Blair bent to avoid the swinging boom. The little boat swung about as though on a pivot. The wind filled the sail. She sped forward like a hawk unhooded. Then something happened. A stay parted. There was a great grinding crack, followed by the snapping and whipping of canvas, and the mast fell. Schuyler was knocked over into the water by the boom. It struck him fair upon the brow. Catherine, springing to catch him, was hit by the flapping canvas. She went overboard too, and under the sail. Blake, on the weather side, was free from the wreck. Without even stopping to turn, he dove backward from the cockpit. Under the cold green water he went. He struck out, blindly, frenziedly. His hand felt something that was not canvas and yet was cloth, struck and gripped. Then, holding his breath still until he thought his lungs would burst, he felt his way out from under the sail. The rail of the boat was at hand. He gripped it, and he dragged Catherine to it. "Hold on!" he cried in her ear. "Jack's gone!" Though but half conscious, she understood. Her firm white fingers gripped the cutting edge of the cockpit rail. She nodded. Blake struck out again. He had tried to remember where he had seen Schuyler disappear. 4 strokes brought him to the spot, and then he dove. Again his hand struck something. Again he pulled and tugged and fought. At length he was at the surface. It was Schuyler. His eyes were closed. The tide, setting down the sound, was carrying the boat from him. He set his teeth. He caught Schuyler by the neck of his jersey, over his own shoulder, bringing his head out of water. And he struck out with his free arm desperately. It seemed as though he would never make progress. A dead weight in the water is hard to drag. Every ounce of strength that was in his strong young body he threw into those long quivering strokes. He must get to the boat. He must. The shore was too far away. He stopped for a minute, treading water. There was no sail in sight. He flattened out in the water again, breasting it with all his power. Stroke after stroke he took, stroke after stroke, reaching with strong right arm, thrusting with strong legs. The boat was no nearer. He kept on, doggedly. He could feel that his strokes were getting weaker. His mouth was under water more than half the time. He had to raise up to breathe, but he fought on. He began to grow dizzy. There was a ringing in his ears. Suddenly he thought he saw, right before him, the face of Catherine Blair. He knew that he did not. He thought he did. That was all. Then, suddenly, his fingers caught a rope. The face was still there, and the rope that he held led to where it was caught between white, even teeth. A great wave hit him a buffet full in the face. It cleared his senses for a moment. Yet perhaps it was more due to the feel of the rope in his fingers. Then he knew that it was she, that the face was real, and the rope went surging through his mind that she, taking the end of the sheet in her teeth, had swum to him and to Schuyler, and that to her they both owed their lives. She was beside him now, swimming strongly. She gripped an arm at the unconscious Schuyler. Together, she and Blake, dividing the weight, slowly, inch by inch, fought their way along the rope. At length, they reached the side of the swamped knockabout. Blake crawled upon its slippery deck. He lay for a moment, helpless. She supported Schuyler. Then he essayed to aid her again, and together they began to lift him out of the water and to safety. Dr. Delancey, from the afterdeck of the Idlesse, had seen the accident. A minute later, he, John Stuyvesant Schuyler, Thomas Cathcart Blake, the captain of the Idlesse, and 2 sailors were in the launch. They reached the side of the knockabout as Blake and Catherine were dragging Jack Schuyler from the water, and they took him into the other boat. Blake, in his father's clutch, followed. At the same time, Dr. Delancey leaned over to grasp Catherine, but she shook her head and smiled weakly. "No," she said. I had to take off part of my clothes. Dr. Delancey was an old man. Some assert that he fell overboard. However, be that as it may, when he came to the surface, he had his arm around Catherine Blair, and she had his long coat draped around her slender figure. And as they lifted her to the deck, she fainted. End of chapter 6.